Last Thursday, I uploaded a video titled "The Ugliest Trap is Coming for Bitcoin." And in today's video, I want to be updating on this view as things do slowly but surely come to fruition. And there is some very tumultuous activity very likely going on for Bitcoin here this coming week. Now, I should say that this video is actually being recorded a day earlier on Sunday. Monday, we will not be live. Well, I'll actually be uploading this video because I'll be getting married. Married to Elsa after almost 9 years of being together. Absolutely crazy. Anyways, let's start it off right on over here with some good old Bitcoin price action analysis. So in last week's video, we were looking at a very likely bounce to come for Bitcoin in the short term without really breaking the prior week's lows. And we have indeed gotten that as of right now. Bitcoin has bounced perfectly off of that white 200 simple moving average on the daily time frame here for CME. I think it's just super technical in this regard. And I do believe that the bounce that we spoke about on that last Thursday's video is now coming to fruition. And we can go over some general targets for that. But let's first go over why that is very likely to happen here. First and foremost, like I said, coming off of that 200 simple moving average is, well, generally a good sort of a bouncy region for any asset, especially after being away from it for a very long time, which certainly we have. In fact, this is about where all of the major lows have come in on this current bull market cycle since 2023 began. You can see the first major one here in March of 2023, again in September of 2023, more recently in 2024 during the summer, and again over here in April of 2025. This is happening yet again, of course, as of this past Thursday/Friday, and Bitcoin now rallying off of there. So that's a really good indication that it will rally some more. But like I said, this is where things get a little bit more difficult as this does turn into a big, massive chop range. So a few things that do suggest that this thing is going to bounce a little bit more are, one, the daily stochastic momentum oscillator is getting down into some very critical zones here. It's things that we just have not seen since August, like late August of this year. And while it is still likely going to open up with some downside momentum coming into this new week, I do expect that this is going to flip back around for at least a bit of a bounce. But as of right now, it's actually still healthily pointed to the downside. But of course, when you get into these critical zones, it just makes it more and more difficult to kind of keep that momentum going down, especially coming off of a major moving average like this. On top of that, and what's significantly more convincing to myself, is looking at volatility indicators like the BBWP right here. And we have what I refer to as like the classic double derp, where you get double extremes relatively quickly, and almost always this will present as a counter, a counter movement. So obviously, if this was an extreme coming down on the volatility reads, then we would be expecting, some mean reversion here, which means this would very likely bounce to the upside. On top of this, we went over a setup last week, which was this one over here, the daily HPDR. And this one is also slowly but surely playing out as well, it does look like. And the setup here is actually quite simple, although it does look rather complicated. But just let me explain really quickly here, and then we'll get into targets for this bounce and then what that essentially means, coming into, I guess, the rest of this coming week. So this setup is predicated upon Bitcoin more or less getting very far outside of the normalish range, outside of this blue range that you see on the daily HPDR indicator. And whenever that happens, we can then start to reference the BBWP indicator, the representing volatility. And whenever that starts to contract, meaning that it starts to come down, which it has started actually as of this past week, then we don't really expect Bitcoin to be closing on any new major lows besides what the prior low was before. And in this case, the prior low before was about 105. Bitcoin closed close to that, but it still closed above it. So that condition is still very much fulfilled here. And as volatility continues to contract, we look for a very high probability move somewhere around, or at least to, the median on that same time frame, the daily, which is this white sort of line that you see right here that my cursor is currently tracing. So that moves around each and every passing day. So this could very well be different, or it obviously will be actually different coming into tomorrow. So, reference this indicator if you do have access to it. Of course, you can also try it out for free in the link in the description below for Teachable. You get 7 days free trial for pretty much everything, actually. Anyway, so looking at this right here, it is currently at about 116,300. Again, I expect that that's going to, shift around. I don't know if it's going to go down or up on these next couple days, but it probably stays somewhere around here if I had to guess. So let's just call it 115 because that sounds about right to me. Again, we will update on this once we actually see the new opens come. But as of right now, I do think that Bitcoin is done going to the downside, especially coming off of a major moving average like this, and especially with this setup overhead as well. And we are very likely to be looking at, a pretty decent bounce. On top of this, if we go back here and we look at a nice little Fibonacci retracement from the high to low of this move, we can see that the 38.2 level is coming in around 112,700. So that's going to be an area of interest on this bounce, but that would still be a little bit on the lower side. The 50% retracement level is right now very close to that median on the HPDR, so good confluence there at about 115,500. And of course, just because the median is a target doesn't mean that things need to stop there. It's just a minimum target, just like all of those moving average setups that we had over the past few weeks. We had minimum targets to the downside, but it can overshoot. Similar in this case, but obviously it would be to the upside. So while 115,500 I think is rather likely here, I like the confluence on that one. Perhaps it could move up all the way to 118 and change or 119 and change. But keep in mind that this is still going to be acting as one mega massive sideways consolidation range. I think that generally speaking, as long as Bitcoin holds this range, it does bode well for the more longer term, because the more that Bitcoin goes sideways, the more it sets in a base, the more that essentially acts as a launching pad for perhaps another leg to the upside, but later on. And as of right now, while Bitcoin is likely to bounce here, I don't think it's going to V bottom back to all-time highs. I think at best, if you're the biggest bull of all time, you're looking for something like this probably. You're looking for boom, back up here, come back down, but set in a higher low, work your way sideways, and then maybe like late December, early January of next year, we see a real try to the upside. Definitely possible. I think that's the most optimistic of all bullish views here. But of course, like I said, the ugliest trap is still very much available, and there are really good reasons to believe that this is likely to play out, or at least certainly not, it hasn't been invalidated yet. That is a big point that I want to get into. So what we've gone over, a very, very likely bounce here. And yes, I do think it is going to bounce. I do want to outline the likelihood that this, can and could very well possibly go lower. So let's go ahead and revisit some of our major statistics that we were looking at coming into October. What I'll do now is I'll go back to this spread over here. And if you recall, during each and every month, we go over at the beginning of the month, the date of the month that is most likely to see the low with respect to history. And right here, we have the stats for October. And we were looking at this as kind of like a guide as to whether the month is likely to close positive or negatively. Whenever we have seen the low of the month come in around day number 7 of October, these have generally been positive closing Octobers from open to close. And as of right now, we have seen the low of the month when? When did we see the low of the month? Well, it was this past Thursday / Friday, so about the 16th of October. Well, let's put that data point into the context of these, of this historical results right here, and we can see that only once in Bitcoin's history have we seen the low of October come at, after the 16th or even on the 16th and still be a positive closing month. That was actually right here in 2019, came in on the 23rd. Bitcoin still closed positively on that, on that October 4, 2019. Other than that, it has always been well before the 16th. In fact, the second closest one, I guess, would be the 2022, which was on the 13th of October. But other than that, more or less coming in a little bit earlier around the end of the first week of October. So that would be point number 1 against this month being a positive closing month. Now, when we go to the negative side of the data over here, I mean, this obviously would fall, directly in alignment with that. I mean, the average here is literally 15.25, and we've already seen the low of the month on the 16th. So, that starts to look a little bit more likely there. But let's take this one step further. Remember, we've also looked at the Bitcoin October open to low data. So what we're doing here is we are measuring the open of the month and the low of the month. So not the close of the month, but literally just the lowest point of that month. And then we bifurcate that data between positive and negative closing Octobers. And we found that even for positive closing Octobers, we generally see an average move to the downside, creating the low of the month about 6%, away. Or if we go off the median, it's a little bit less than that, about 4%. Now, if we go over negative Octobers, Obviously, that's going to be a lot greater, right? Closer to 30% differential between the open and the low. But let's now look at the positive side of this data and see if that fits in the context of what we're looking at right now. Because we already obviously have the open of October, and the open of October was where? It was 113, or sorry, about 114 actually. And the low of the month was 103,600 on the index here, which is how I used all of this data to derive all of this data. And that was a differential of about just over 9%. So that definitely is greater. That's about 50% greater than the general average. And we've actually only ever seen Bitcoin have a positive close in October with a greater drop off between the open and the low of the month twice. It was here in 2013 and here again in, where was the other one? Oh yeah, in 2019 as well. Both of these were actually in double digits, which is close to what we've seen thus far for Bitcoin. So, is it a little bit less likely? Yeah, it's definitely less likely right now, actually. Now, does this change my opinion on the fourth quarter stats? Because, whenever we have seen a green September, it's always led to a green fourth quarter. It could very well still be green. October could be red, November and December could be green, and the totality of that move could still be a greater close than what September closed with. Definitely possible. So I wouldn't throw that out the window just yet, but it is looking more and more likely that October will be a negative closing month, or at least there is good reason to believe that this is very much possible right now after a bit of a bounce. And a bounce, like I said, can easily come up. In fact, probably even expected to come up around about 115. I do want to represent both sides very clearly here because there are major implications for this next move. So I will now get into, as I get some Uber Eats notifications in the background. Great. I don't order that shit. I'm not ordering that shit. Let's go over. Okay, so we went over that. Okay, beautiful. Now let's go over some of the major setups that we've been using to guide the big moves on this channel. So first, we shall go over. Yeah, we'll go over this one here first. This is the 5-day volatility versus stochastic momentum setup. We've seen this many times on this channel. It's led to all of the major moves in Bitcoin's history, more or less. And we are on the verge of seeing this fire off yet again. The 5-day BBWP indicator, which represents volatility, getting below 15 percentile initiates the setup overall. And when the volatility indicator gets back above 15 percentile, which is not right now, it's at about 11.5 percentile, or about 1151 percentile. When it gets back above 15 percentile, it then sort of initiates the setup. It green lights the rest of the setup, which then we go ahead and reference the 5-day stochastic momentum oscillator, and whatever direction that is pointed in upon confirmation of volatility expansion above 15 percentile is an extremely likely direction for price for a big fucking move. When I say big fucking move, I mean anywhere between 20 to 40%. We'll go over the stats in a moment here, but as of right now, again, this setup has not fired off, but you can see it's baking in the background, and it very well could fire off soon. And if we do see volatility rise back above 15 percentile, well, as of right now, the 5-day stochastic oscillator is positioned to the downside, but not so fast. Wait, there's more. We can look at the pivot needed for this next 5-day closure in order to force the stochastic oscillator back into the upwards direction. And that would imply that Bitcoin just needs to close above 108,200 or so, and a little bit of change right now. Right now, Bitcoin is like $100 away from that number as of this exact moment on the index. Again, it's going to flow. It's going to, flight and flow around many times before we actually get the period closing. But we still have about 3.5 days left to go. So anything can happen between now and 3 days. Again, I am biased towards a bounce here in the short term, regardless of whether you're the biggest bear or the biggest bull. I do think that you are likely to see a bounce at least above 110. Does that bounce hold above 108,200 before the end of that closure in about 3.5 days? Who knows? We shall see. We'll know for sure once we get to, I guess, Wednesday of this week. Yeah, Wednesday of this week. Again, this video is being recorded on Sunday. But Bitcoin would just need to close above 108,200. And assuming that volatility is still expanding at that point above 15 percentile, that would actually make me quite bullish, because we can look at the historical results for this setup, which has happened many times in Bitcoin's history. And for the upside one, it's actually never failed, which is kind of crazy. But there's been 16 prior times we've seen this fire off. on this time frame for Bitcoin in the full history of Bitcoin. In all 16 of them, when the stochastic oscillator was positioned to the upside upon volatility expansion confirmation, big price action followed through to the upside over the course of the next month, basically a little bit over a month, about 34 days on average for this move to play out. And the average return was about 41% with a standard deviation of 11%. So again, we're talking about a big fucking move, like big fucking move. But as of right now, it's still kind of far away and it's just in the background. And of course, if we see that stochastic oscillator position to the downside, we could apply this same sort of setup to the downside. Now, the downside stats aren't as convincing. I mean, they're still pretty good, to be honest, but we have seen some failures with this one. And again, with the long side of it, like at some point we're going to see a failure there as well. It's going to happen. Like that's not going to be perfect for forever, obviously. Like if we fast forward fucking 50 years, I'm sure it's going to fail many times. But as of right now, it has not failed. The short side of this setup has certainly failed, and in this case, it has still had a rather high win rate of about 83.33%, but you can see that, it does have some failures there. Anyways, the average move that does typically come upon this has been around, it's been around about 34.5% with a standard deviation of about 11.5% as well. So, if we're looking at this move to occur, I mean, we're like, if it happens to the upside, then you're going to see Bitcoin like, I don't know, fucking 130, 140, 150, something like that by end of, November, perhaps. If we see it to the downside, I can already kind of eyeball it here for you. It's going to be like 90,000 to 85,000 bucks to the downside. Again, on average, we'd kind of expect to move down around there. But again, this setup has not fired off. It is absolutely critical to see the 5-day volatility indicator get above that 15 percentile marker first before, really looking at this as valid. But there's another thing. There's another thing actually as well. And it is everyone's favorite setup to hate, which is the witches, the old witches over here, the moons. The moons are firing off yet again very, very soon. Right now, we are in the traditionally more bullish moon phase. Obviously, that has not worked out great for this particular iteration here. We have seen actually most of these iterations, especially to the upside, work out incredibly well as of recent this year. But this one has more or less fired off basically at the high here for Bitcoin, at basically its all-time high, and been down only ever since. Now, after, I think it is Wednesday, on Wednesday, we will get the new moon, which if you are familiar with astrology, outside of TA astrology for men, but like real astrology, that is traditionally the more bearish time. And you can actually see over here for all of these blue moons, which are the new moons, these have generally preceded downside periods. Now, not always, again, these can fail. We just saw the last, traditionally bullish one fail, more or less. I mean, assuming Bitcoin rallies back above 125 by the end of Wednesday, which I don't think is happening, but hey, anything's possible, I guess. But unlikely, if I had to guess. These downside moves, I mean, this would be a setup for, being a little bit more biased towards a downside resolution once we get that new moon firing off. So that will happen on Wednesday. So again, that would add on a little bit more to the bearish case. But again, in the short term, do I think Bitcoin's going to bounce here? Yeah, I do think Bitcoin's going to bounce, probably around 115 if I had to guess. Anyways, getting back into my notes and going further and farther down now, let's also now go after one of our other setups, which is now starting to spill into another time frame. So if we go back here, we've seen many of these moving average setups play out as of recent. We saw it on the 12-hour, the daily, the 2-day, the 3-day, and even the 4-day. Even though I got a lot of shit for it at the time, it did indeed play out at the end of the day. And it is a very simple setup. Whenever we see the red moving average cross the downside of the yellow moving average, there is a correction that is initiated at minimum to the green moving average. At minimum means at least price action gets down there first before any sort of like major try to the upside. These have been really, really consistent on these time frames for the past 8 years for Bitcoin. And we've seen it now go up all the way to a 5-day time frame. This one basically all happened in one blow, which actually is quite common for a lot of these setups. Again, these are not good setups to play straight up. These are for directional bias analysis on YouTube. That is what they're primarily for, to give us an idea of what direction price is going, but they are not great setups to actually play in the way that, I have them tested right here. But yeah, you can see that all of these playing out, even if it technically failed or even if it technically had a loss, like they all got those corrections down. That's my point. And in this case, we can see that the 5-day time frame is also fired off, but it's now going to bleed into likely the weekly and the 8-day time frame. I think the 8-day time frame is even a little bit more obvious right here. At some point, if Bitcoin is still below about 110,000 US dollars, it is extremely likely to happen that we will get this cross maybe on the next period or two. Another period or two would put us about 16 days out, which would be in the heart of that new moon, which is traditionally a bearish time. So while we could see a rally in the short term, and I do think we will see a rally in the short term, if you see Bitcoin really start to settle below 110 on these next couple periods, closing for the 8-day or even the weekly time frame, is basically the same shit, to be honest. For these next couple periods, then we will get this cross happening very, 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 very likely as well. And as of right now, that green moving average is all the way down at $96,000, which would be a big correction, to be fair. We could also draw a Fibonacci retracement, getting areas of interest for the downside as well. And you can see that that green 55 EMA is going to settle somewhere around the 618 or maybe a little bit closer to the 50% retracement level. But both of these should be major areas of interest on any sort of a downside move if Bitcoin does choose the downside direction. 50% retracement level is about $100,000 and change. 618 is about $94,000. So areas of interest, again, if Bitcoin does break down after a short-term rally. Just be aware of that. And of course, while we haven't necessarily gone over this recently, I do want to revisit the higher term time frame stochastic momentum oscillators as still all being suggestive of a period of caution. Whenever we see all of the higher term time frames, like the weekly and above, angled in the same direction, one major rule that I have is just don't look for the other direction to happen on like a big move. Again, it's not impossible, but it's just very unlikely. Right now, the weekly time frame, obviously for CME, is already settled, and this one continues down coming into this new week as Bitcoin did settle below 118,500. The 2-week time frame, which is going to be closing at the end of this next week, is still coming down from the critical level and is going to be showing down some momentum as long as Bitcoin's below 121,000 US dollars. That one closes at the end of this week, by the way, as well. On top of that, the 3-week time frame is also going to be closing at the end of this next coming week, and this one is officially crossing to the downside and continuing below that critical zone as long as Bitcoin's below 124,000 US dollars. And the monthly time frame, which again, we still have another couple weeks until the end of this month, but this one will actually cross the downside officially if Bitcoin finishes this month out below 116. So I do think we get a rally around that 115 number. Bitcoin really needs to remain above it by the end of this month to keep open the more immediate bullish hopium, in my opinion. Whenever we see all these higher term time frame stochastic momentum oscillators come down from that critical zone and agree with each other, these have been all of the major corrective phases throughout this cycle. And I think that warrants some consideration here. So is there potential for, a move into the 90s? Yeah, I think so for sure. It's definitely a potential here. Again, I want to see how this next week goes. Can Bitcoin basically hold above 115? That's going to start to look pretty good the longer that can do, especially into the end of this month. But if it fails, especially close to the end of this month, that will be a setup for lower first before anything else. Now, again, I wouldn't necessarily say that the rest of the Q4 is going to be all red here, but that would not, it would obviously imply, a sizable correction here first. Anyways, I think that is pretty much what I wanted to say on this video. It's gone a lot longer than what I expected, but I really wanted to update on that video from last week about the ugliest trap perhaps occurring, because again, assuming that we do get this bounce, which can come up significantly, like $7,000-8,000 from where you're at right now, that would still be kind of in the kill zone here. And if you do see a rejection, it comes down harsh, those setups will play out to the downside, and we're probably looking, into the mid to low 90s on a break. But as long as Bitcoin is just holding this low, I guess there certainly is hopium here, but just be aware of where those things start to switch around. On top of that, I'll bring you one last setup right here. Although do I really want to go through this right now? No, we're not going to go through this one right now. But there's another big setup basically brewing as well that would be a very high probability downside move if it fires off. But again, we should wait for the bounce first, because the bounce should bring Bitcoin above these critical levels. Anyways, like I said, we're probably getting married at this exact moment. So we'll be back on Tuesday with a more relevant analysis for the short term. Today's video only focused on the higher term timeframes. Again, if you want access to any one of these tools, check out the link in the description below for Teachable. There's free trials for all of them pretty much, except for the Crown Trading Bible. But of course, that's more of an educational program, so it doesn't really make sense to have it for that. Anyways, we shall end things on that note. As always, want to wish everyone the best of the best. Take care. Much love, and see you hopefully Tuesday.